And most people don't have to commute here, so we've got that going for us. This is a webinar about Cloud Run and continuous integration and deployment. Cloud Run takes care of a lot of that, so we'll get into that. Just a little bit about Observian. We do a lot of stuff to help people around the industry to kind of upgrade their experience with things from APMs to helping them get into the cloud or optimize their experience in the cloud. We do all of that. And we also try to help with specific things like containers. Anyway, you can read those things. If you have a need of help with that, we're definitely interested in trying to help you out. The ways we do that are a lot of teaching. So that's what this is about. We want to try to impart as much knowledge as we can. And that's what these meetups are for. So a little bit about me. I'm Dan Taylor. I've been a principal software engineer at Ghostery. If you've heard of Ghostery, their browser extension. Justin Donahoe was the tech lead there and helped us out with a lot of stuff. We did some really cool things with big data and a lot of cloud optimization there. I've been in the industry for around 13 years, and I've done stuff with software as a service and forensics and MLMs. So I've kind of been all around the block and got experience in all that. So I don't want to go into too much detail about that. We'll let this product speak for itself here. So who's this for? You've got a passing familiarity with Docker and containers and web services. If you have any experience with those things, you're going to be fine. I don't think you're going to get lost in this. This is going to get a little bit technical, but I think you'll be able to follow along if you have just even a passing familiarity with that. So if you want to learn more about how to do containers in the cloud and how to deploy things and how to do things cheap, then you're in the right place. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of compute provisioning. Back when I worked at Melaleuca up in Idaho, they had a whole basement full of servers. And it was actually really funny the way they did security around that. You had actual security guards standing guard at the doors into the server room. And every month we would have meetings about who was in there that wasn't supposed to be in there. And we even talked about having a code, like challenge response code words to make sure that whoever was in there was supposed to be in there. We've kind of moved away from that, right? So moving up the hill, and we started to go to, okay, well, let's do VMs and let's go host them in a data center instead of here in the building. Racking and stacking things is hard, and we'd rather do that somewhere else. VMs helped us solve a lot of problems, but nothing like containers has, right? Instead of having to actually provision memory and disk and all that on an individual VM, now we can just have the container talk to the kernel, and the kernel does all the work. The container runtime does all the work, and you can just worry about the actual app. That has disadvantages too, and we decided as an industry, well, what if we just had an actual function? Google Cloud Functions is one of the things that has kind of evolved. Serverless is another one. Amazon Lambdas. Those kind of seem to be the pinnacle of this runtime environment, right? So we only have to pay for the runtime. We'll get into that, but that's kind of where we've been going. Serverless has some interesting benefits. You only have to pay for uptime, right? You don't have to pay for runtime, not uptime. You only have to pay for what you actually use, not what you provision. So that's been a really interesting thing to see for lots of people that wouldn't have otherwise had a foothold into the industry. So you can get people that are doing these startups at rock bottom costs, pennies a month. Observian's website is, I think, still less than $1 a month for how much we pay in hosting costs, and it's because of serverless. And it's been great. We get that foothold early, and you can still have a really big web presence. And your costs will scale up and down with that demand. You don't have to pay for that idle time. So if nobody hits our website, I mean, that's sad, but at least we're not paying for the compute time there. So that's been a huge thing. You have the auto scaling as well, right? You don't have to actually go configure the maximum number of instances you need, and you can scale to 0. And the Google Cloud Functions can scale up to 1,000, which is way bigger than most auto scaling groups you would ever see. You'd have to really tax the limits of AWS or Google to get that many VMs. And it's all it ships out of the box. That's all it does that automatically. So that's been a huge deal too. But what about the cons? What's wrong with serverless? Well, local testing is not trivial. To be able to go test your function, you actually have to go deploy it. And you have to deploy it in such a way that it's not going to overwrite what you have already deployed. So that means you have to go create another function and go test it and hope that it's the same as the one that's in prod in terms of the environment and everything else. So you have to make sure that's all documented and source controlled. So that's not easy. You can set it up, but it's just hard, and that'll lengthens your code test debug cycle. If you've been in software development at all, you know that shortening that code test debug cycle saves a ton of money and time. Time's money, right? So that's not a good thing. We don't like that about serverless. You also have to use the provided runtimes. Lambdas have a lot of runtimes, but Google Cloud Functions only have 3. You got Node, Go, and Python. If you're using something else, then you don't get to use Cloud Functions. So you lose a lot of the experience that you might have otherwise had in software development just because whoever it is that you want to hire doesn't have experience with that programming language. So they call that the polyglot, and you have to go see what the market can offer you in terms of people who know those languages, or you have to go train people. Either way, you're losing time. There are also some language features that some of the compiled languages have that might not be offered in something like Node. Things like interfaces and those things do kind of exist, but they're not the same. And those language features are lost when you're dealing with just serverless. And if you have an application that you definitely, you want to go to serverless, but it's not in one of those languages, you may have to rewrite it. And that's not cheap. So what about Docker? You got these pros and cons for serverless. What does Docker do? Well, you've probably thought about this already. You don't have to worry about works on my box. With the exception of credentials, a local test is a prod test. It's the same thing. It's a container. So you get that high confidence when you're deploying. You've already got this huge community. Docker's just got a huge following, and there's lots and lots of tools that exist to help you with all that. So you've got that going for you too. There's images for almost anything. You can leverage the polyglot. If you don't already have an image, you can build one pretty easily. It doesn't take very long to build a Docker image. And because you can import your existing language, you didn't have to do that rewrite like you did before for most things. Obviously, there are exceptions. .NET Classic on Windows is one of them. I wouldn't recommend using Windows containers. But either way, you can import that much easier than you could with serverless. And you can also experiment with new things locally. Just pull down an image and test it out is so much easier than it used to be. To go install something and try it and get the runtime working, you can just pull the image and bash into it and you're good. What's bad? If you're trying to deploy, every developer who's ever tried Docker is say, okay, I've got this working in my box, now what do I do? You have to go have this conversation with whoever's handling your capacity planning. Okay, well, let's go install a Docker host, and now how do I deploy to it? Do I remote into it and use some kind of machine image to spin it up, or what do I do? It's not easy. And then even once you do set that up, you have to worry about orchestration, and you have uptime on the box that you're deploying the container on. You have a container host that has to deal with that uptime. So then you do have to worry about those auto scaling rules. So you've got these pros and cons. Wouldn't it be great if you could just get all the pros and none of the cons? Well, that's what Cloud Run does. You only have to worry about runtime costs. You can test it locally because it's container. You have this huge cornucopia of runtimes, and you have the automagical scaling. That's been amazing. So I'm going to show you that today and show you how it works and show you how easy it is. And then you don't have to take this hard right to go to functions. You can continue on the path to containers. So I put together a little demo for you. I'm going to share my screen and you can see what's going on. So I've got a .NET Core app, so it's not a serverless runtime. And I'm going to use Circle CI to deploy it. Circle CI is my favorite CI tool that I've been using. It's free for public stuff, and I would recommend that you try it if you haven't already. So we're going to take a .NET Core runtime, use Circle CI to package up a Docker image, and we're going to put that in the Google Container Registry and then deploy it. So I'll show you what that looks like here. Okay, so here's our Google Cloud Console. And I also have Rider, which is the JetBrains tool for Mac for building building .NET stuff. And just to give you a quick rundown, this is just the stock Web API code that ships with .NET Core. I haven't made hardly any changes to it. The only thing I did do was I made it so it will go look at the environment variable called port and dynamically assign whatever port is put in the environment variable at startup. That's basically all I've done. So if I want to package this, if you're familiar with Docker, I just do a Docker build rm to remove the intermediate. Oh, I should show you the Docker file. So if you're not familiar with multi-stage builds, I'll just walk through this real quick with you. This is the base image for Microsoft for their SDK. So this has everything it needs to build things, including the runtime, and it has all the compilation packages that it needs. So I'm going to take this base image and I'm going to alias it with a build, make a build work directory, then copy in my project, this Cloud Run demo, do all the restoration processes for the packages it references, and then publish it out and put it in a publish folder. Then I've got a runtime image, and then I'm going to take out the root user and just shove all the stuff that I got and publish and put it in the app runtime. And that's it. It's pretty simple. So I'm not doing anything crazy here. This is just a really quick and dirty multi-stage build. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to give it the name of Cloud Run Demo in the GCR repo. And I've got a project here that I've aliased. So we'll see this build. Okay, so now I've got this, whoops. I've got this local image. And there's an intermediate image there that got built during the multi-stage build. So now I've got this cool local image, and I can test it. So I can Docker run. And map port 80 to port 8080. Whoops, I need to map the port before I see the image. All right, so now I've got this running, and I can come over here to my browser and just test it. This is a web API image. I don't consider myself a UI person. I can do it if I have to, but it's not my favorite. So it's just going to spit out a bunch of data. If we go look at the code, it just basically randomly selects a few things and gives us a JSON object. So it works locally. So they're already in, what, 30 seconds it took me to build and test it locally, maybe 1 minute. So that's already a great benefit. So now I want to run it on Cloud Run. So that means I got to push it up to their repo. So I can say Docker push, Cloud Run demo. Okay, and then I can come back to Google, and let's go check GCR and see if it's there. There it is. So there's my local, and okay, great. So it's just now uploaded. So then I can go to Cloud Run and go create a service. Okay, I'm going to delete these because I was just doing that a second ago. So I don't want to get confused. So I'm going to create a service, and I'm going to call it Cloud Run Demo. And I'm going to quit Slack so that doesn't come out again. Okay, and I'm going to allow unauthenticated invocations. That means that I can go hit the endpoint for it without having to have an IAM role token configured into my header. And then I can just go select my image. Here's my Cloud Run demo that I just made. and create. Okay, so usually takes about 30 seconds. I'm going to open up Q&A. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, I'll just leave that open and you can ask a question if you want. Okay, so here's Cloud Run demo. It's got a green health check. So that means I can go hit this. I didn't configure the app to respond on the root path. So this is going to fail, but then if I go add the endpoint that I did locally, it'll work. So that took 2 minutes. Now I have a working service and all I did was point it at an image. And that to me that's just huge, right? What other service can you just point an image at something, you have a working web service and that fast? So obviously I did all that manually. You don't want to do that at scale, obviously. So what I've done is CircleCI has this config and I just scripted it out. So the way I do this is I go grab some environment variables and I just take the last 8 digits of the git SHA that gets created on every commit and I build that into the image. Then here's the familiar commands of Docker build. So I've got an image with a build number for a version, and then I've got one with the SHA attached to it also. So I tag the same image twice with 2 different tags so that I can go track down if I need to, I can go look at the git SHA and go track it down in Git and see what code is actually running in the image. And then this is just authentication with Google. They give you a key and you can just export it into an environment variable so it knows how to authenticate with the Google Cloud. And then I just push it out. Then I have this debugging statement to show me what's actually getting pushed. And then here's the Cloud Run deploy. And this is basically the same parameters I put in the UI. While I'm looking at this, I wanted to show you the documentation for Cloud Run is actually really cool. There's all kinds of stuff here. There's way too much here than would be useful to go through in a meetup, but all the stuff that I'm showing you, I learned by going through this stuff. So there's just a ton of stuff that you can do. Gradual rollouts. If we were to go back and look at this service, you can see 100% of traffic is being served on this. If I wanted to do that more gradually, that's configurable. And you can also set that up in that script that I showed you. So I just wanted to point that out. It's worth your while to go look at that if you're interested in this at all. Okay, so now let's look at our CI/CD process. What if I want to go deploy it, to go deploy a change? Whoops. I use Git Kraken for Git management. Let's say I'm in develop and I want to do something cool. Let's say I want to come into my controller and I want to respond on root, right? So, or just on a different endpoint. What if I want to respond on foo instead of weather forecast? So obviously I wouldn't do that for real, but you know how it goes. All right, so adding foo, and I'm going to push that out, and then we can watch our build pipeline. Okay, so this takes about a minute or so, a minute and a half. We could watch the output of this, but we could also do questions if you guys have any questions so far. Oh, I can turn on your mics if you want to talk instead of type. All right, so I'll just drill into this. So the way CircleCI works, just while we're in here, if you haven't looked at this, it's all container based. So if you go into the config, you can actually see that you can just assign an image, whatever image you want to build with. So you can install whatever you need to in the image, in your build image. I already had this put into GCR just to prep for this, but you can put anything, right? So you could install any kind of build stuff you want, and that's your runtime environment for Circle CI. So that's what it does. It pulls down your build image and then goes and builds the image that you tell it to build. And it's already got all the tooling in place for Docker too. It's actually really cool. I don't want this to be a Circle CI commercial, but and it's definitely not the only service that allows you to do container-based builds. All right, success. So I can come back to my services and look at that. There's a developed service that's been created. It's also got unauthenticated access, and I can do a foo, and it's happy. So that starts to be really powerful, especially if you have a really good microservice architecture. You can start to see how this would be really super amazing, especially for business stakeholders. So if you were to come back to your code and say, hey, I'm developing this cool new feature, I want the stakeholder to be able to test it before I do anything else with it. So I can make a cool new feature branch and come in here, and now I have this cool new feature branch that Circle CI can pick up, and I can do whatever I want, right? I can go back to my controller, and I can change the result, and it's just output the version of it, and that's my cool feature. So I can say this is semantic version 2.1 or whatever, and then check that in. By the way, if you're not using Git crack and forget, then that's a thing that you should look at. And there's that running. So then you can go, this is obviously going to create another URL just like we saw before, and you can go give that to your stakeholder, and they can go test in a completely pristine feature environment. So that's one of the biggest things that I saw. And if you go look at my bill for Google, even after doing all this testing and setting up, I think it's like 6 cents is going to be my bill for this month. So it starts to get super powerful. Any questions so far?
Hey, Dan, did you see the question from Michael?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, there's a question up there.
Cool, thank you. How does Circle CI handle concurrent build requests? For example, someone commits to a branch that is currently being built. Okay, so Michael, the Circle CI has the way they do their pricing. I can just show you this. They give you a certain number of build credits, and you get 2,500 of them for free per week. And I've used, what, 32% of them this week. If you want more credits, you just buy more, and then they just will run parallel depending on how many credits you have. So it's actually pretty cool. And again, this isn't necessarily a Circle CI commercial, but there's if you go look at GitHub Actions, they have pretty similar container-based things. But yeah, that's a good question. If you have a whole team pushing stuff at the same time, you don't want those builds to queue up. Good call. All right, so cool new feature finished. So I can come over here. Here's my services. And here's my cool new feature. And then I just configured this one to respond on root, and there's my new feature. So that's all I really wanted to show you for Cloud Run, is just how quickly you can iterate. You know, we've been talking for 15, 20 minutes about this, and we've already got 3 different services out. I know I didn't make a lot of code changes, but I also didn't make a lot of infrastructure changes. That was pretty amazing. All I had to do was change a couple of items in my build script, and I had 3 working services based on different code. So, and it got auto built. I didn't have to go provision it beforehand, and I didn't have to do anything, right? I just changed a couple of things in my script. So obviously, if you have a bunch of interacting things in microservices, you have like Istio working, or if you want to run this in Kubernetes, then you're going to have other considerations. But I just wanted to show you what Cloud Run is capable of and how awesome it is. If you go poke around here, you can see that there's logs, that these all get logged in Stackdriver from standard out, and it's got really cool stuff. Debugging here is so easy. You've got all this wonderful output. You can look at metrics. They've just done an amazing job. It's hard for me to believe that a service this robust is as cheap as it is, but here it is. All right, so that's that. Let me give you a couple of gotchas. How could Cloud Run or Circle CI be used to improve loading processes or reporting services on a data warehouse? So I would imagine you'd want to leverage the availability of the parallelization on Cloud Run. So you could have it listen on an HTTP endpoint for whatever your inputs are for your ingress. You could scale out that way and just have it all. Actually, I'd probably use PubSub for that, but you could use Cloud Run to handle the ETL processes too. So depending on how you're doing it, because Cloud Run is Cloud Run and you can use any container image you want, that would be something that you could consider there. Parallelization and cheap runtime is, I guess, the short answer to that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slides real quick and just give you a couple of gotchas. You should listen on the root directory. I've seen a couple of times where Cloud Run gets confused when the root directory doesn't respond. Also, make sure you assign that port dynamically. You need to go find that in the environment variable. If you don't have that in your runtime somewhere, then it's going to fail. The health check will just fail. So that's easy to forget. Also, cold starts. Any serverless architecture, be it Cloud Run or serverless or Cloud Functions, the reason you're not paying for uptime is because there isn't one, right? So if the function finishes and drops, then that resource gets reallocated elsewhere or just shut down. So when you go hit the endpoint, if it's not already warm, it takes sometimes tens of seconds to start up. So you have to go figure out a way to keep it warm. Google's got a cloud scheduler to make cron jobs to do that. And how long it stays warm isn't consistent. So you have to kind of dial that in. But you could do something really easy to keep it warm, like on your endpoint here. You could do something like if request, whoops. Contains key something like warm, then you could just go ahead and return a 204. So that way the runtime that you're actually executing is still going to be milliseconds, but it'll keep it warm for that time. So that's an option that you could consider too. You're going to have to dial it in. If you need your Cloud Run thing to be millisecond responsive, you're going to have to consider warming time. So those are the gotchas I have. And then if you are considering using functions, I just made this quick little table for you to look at. There's just some of the compares and contrasts. Those are all things to look at. We get that question a lot. Should I use Cloud Functions or should I use containers? What should I do? So there's your main hit points there. So that's all I have for you today. This was scheduled for 2 hours, but we didn't have commute time. We didn't have to get people seated. We didn't have to have a lot of the stuff that we'd normally have if we were meeting in person. So any other questions? All right. that is all I had for you.
Hey, Dan, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, hey, guys, I'm Ryan Allred from the Observian team. I don't have my beautiful face up there right now, but we'd just like to say thanks for joining us. If you do have any questions, we can keep this open for the next few minutes. We do have a recording of this, and so we'll make that available to all you guys. And then there's also going to be a little Q&A after. If you could just tell us what you liked about this, what you didn't like. We're really trying to optimize this in this crazy world that we're living in right now. We definitely want to make sure that people are still getting value out of these meetups. And if you have ideas for meetups going forward, this is something that we host alongside with Tyranny Data and Google Cloud. And so we're more than happy to tackle any Google Cloud topics that you guys might be interested in. And so we're always looking for more topics, and we get those driven by you guys. So please fill those out and let us know what you want to see.
Yep. And I see Michael Jensen asked the question, how does Cloud Run handle high memory or high CPU workloads? Do you have to allocate resources? If you do a managed service, you can go in and kind of dial that in. If you have stuff that you think is going to take longer than, or take more CPU or take more memory, then I believe you can go set that up in the advanced stuff. So I actually haven't had a need to do that yet, so I haven't looked at it a lot. But if I go create a service,
hey Dan, just so you know, we're still seeing your slides. Not yep.
So here's all the other stuff. You can dial in the CPUs. I guess you can have 2, and you can have more memory, and then you can customize that. It's going to try to scale out as opposed to scaling up if you max out your CPU. So yeah, you can play with that. Obviously, allocating more resources there is going to be more. So let's see, what does auto cleanup look like within Cloud Run? Do you have a way to specify time limits for certain feature branches to auto be removed for a clutter-free console? So do you have a way to specify time limits for certain feature branches? No, yeah, you're gonna have to go, I think, Matt, what you're saying is if I go in here to my services, I don't wanna have 100 services that people made for feature branches are just laying around. I think that's what you're asking. No, there isn't a way to set that up, at least with their current config. You would have to go probably handle that with Terraform. Terraform and Cloud Run aren't totally in sync yet. The Terraform can create them, but cannot update them. So if you run the same Terraform script twice, it errors because it says I already have this and I can't recreate it. But in terms of destroying it, that would be something I would put on a cron job to run a Terraform script to destroy things that don't have a specific tag or something in terms of Cloud Run services. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Good questions, guys. Anything else? Oh, good question, Justin. How are you handling secrets? So Google doesn't have the best answers for this right now. They did I just saw this just now, actually, that they put in a secrets area. And I haven't had time to see if it's actually worthwhile. What I've been doing is setting up I made a Google storage bucket that I just put a file in there that I parse out, and it's fine for one-off stuff. But if you're doing secrets at scale in Google, then you're going to want to consider something like Vault. You have to go spin that up and deploy it and whatever you're going to do. So here's variables and secrets. Cool. Thanks, Matt, for answering Matt Deaver's question. So yeah, this is what I thought. It's just environment variables. So I wouldn't put secrets in here. I would store them elsewhere. The environment variables are available for anybody to see. So not good practice there. Any other questions?
So Dan, do you have much experience? Can you hear my microphone?
I can.
Okay, do you have much experience using Cloud Build? I've used Circle CI a bit and I really like it. I also find for container build processes, Cloud Build can be a really nice tool. Maybe we can cover that in another meetup.
Yeah, we definitely should cover, definitely lots of things in the build space. I haven't used Cloud Build as much. I tried it 1 or 2 times and I found it to be a little bit clunky for me.
Yeah.
But it's fine. I mean, if you're all in on Google, then why not, right? It's just part of your costs, right? Yeah, good question. Cool. Well, thanks for showing up, guys. I'm glad we got to have some time together, even though we can't meet in person. But I'm glad we can still do this stuff. Any other questions? All right, well, we can hop off. We'll see you guys at the next one, I guess. Maybe we'll talk about builds again.
Awesome. Thanks everyone who participated. Thanks for the awesome questions. We'll make sure we get a recording out to you guys. If you do have questions going forward, feel free to reach out to the Observian team or the Tyranny Data team. We work closely with all of the Google Cloud reps here in the area and would love to answer questions and kind of get you moving down that path. So feel free to reach out and give us any ideas going forward on what we should focus on.
Cool. See you guys later.